Hi, everybody. We're the Skeleton Crew, and we are approaching the end of this series. I, for one, am ready to be done doing this particular bit. When we proposed this idea 2 years ago, I didn't think this would still be happening, and yet here we are, recording a tier list ranking for a dinosaur in a video game. Today we're going to be talking about Dracorex. A lot of people would tell you that this isn't a dinosaur, but I think that our opinions on it could be kind of spoiled by the fact that this is its own episode of this series. So we are going to be talking a little bit about that today. Before we talk more about Dracorex, though, a few things that I want to mention. I am a YouTuber, kind of against my will, and as such, I have to remind you that you have to, and this was my idea, so it's not against my will at all. In fact, I've dragged everybody else to the circle of hell with me. But comment on the video, like the video, share the video with your friends. Subscribe to our Patreon. We have benefits for you. Do all of these things for us, please. Our parents are very proud of us. We have our Patreon. We have comments on YouTube. We have likes on YouTube. We have merchandise on Etsy. You should take a look at our Etsy shop. There's a link in the description. The designs are great. There's going to be more stuff appearing there probably shortly. So, you're going to want to keep your eye out. It's going to be some good stuff. And you should check out our Patreon again, because we're going to be increasing the quality and quantity of our Patreon benefits. So you'll probably have noticed this month, if you're keeping up with our content, we're finally getting through a backlog of Q&As that we've had accumulate. We apologize to all of our patrons for the accumulation, and we thank them for their patience with us. The fall is always a really difficult time for paleontologists, because we go right from our field seasons and our teaching season into our conferences and everything like that. So things tend to be pretty difficult schedule-wise, but we're catching up. We're doing more of that. We're going to be starting watch-along videos soon, so keep your eyes peeled for that stuff. A lot of really exciting things. All available to you when you patronize the Skeleton Crew. Also, Alex isn't here today. Alex, we sent him on a journey overland to the mountains of Transylvania in the Carpathian Alps. We received word that an elderly nobleman from a very ancient European family had a fossil that he wanted to donate to us for our research. And so we sent him there to the man's estate to negotiate the deal in person and sign the paperwork. We haven't heard from him in a while. We will follow up, I guess, in a few days when we find out what's going on. Hopefully we've got some really exciting things to tell you about with that Transylvanian fossil.
I've been having a whole lot of fits and weird dreams, and I imagine these are unrelated.
Completely unrelated. That's the turning of the year. Mm-hmm. This is Providence smiled upon us, but he would only treat with one of us if we went in person. Right. But such is the esoteric ways of
right. We had to go in the flesh, as it were.
Yeah.
So, without further ado, and to get you toward Dracorex ever faster, I'm Dr. James Napoli. I'm a research instructor at Stony Brook University, where I teach human anatomy to health science professional students.
My name is Amelia Zietlow. I'm a PhD candidate at the American Museum of Natural History, where I am slowly going insane.
My name is Scott Johnston. I'm the vertebrate paleontology fossil preparator and technician at Harvard University's Museum of Comparative Zoology. When I was insane the whole time, it was actually on my qualifications. It was under my supplementary skills.
And my name's Dalton Meyer. I am a PhD candidate at Yale University, currently the only PhD candidate at Yale University on the call. As we mentioned, the other is in Transylvania. And I am, I think, more empathetic with Squidward than ever before, in particular when he gets thrown into the fly of despair.
Good reference. Man, I haven't thought about that in a hot minute.
It's a good show. That's
and
it's a good show.
It sure is. And together, we're the
Skeleton
Crew.
Yeah.
But if we're the Skeleton Crew, and Dracorex is the dinosaur we're talking about today, then who was flickering the lights?
Now, Dalton, I have an appetite, nothing more, for some small pachycephalosaurs from the Hell Creek Formation.
Well, let's get some out then. Let's populate our world.
Oh no! Amelia disappeared again in the second consecutive video. Whoa. What's going on? Oh my god, is it another sponsored ad read?
It ate Amelia.
the ad ate Amelia. We have to put money into the monster's mouth to get her out. Yes, it's a sponsored ad read, and we're talking about the Sternberg Science Camps again. We're thrilled to be partnered with them. So in our last ad read, we talked about registration opening about a week from when the video went up. And if you're watching this video when it goes up, registration should have been open for about a week already. It'll be open until April 7th of 2025. So if you didn't watch our Spinosaurus video for some reason, or you've forgotten everything that we said in it,
that makes
just
sense.
a little reminder. The Sternberg Science Camps are an amazing organization run by paleontologists, both as instructors and administrative staff, where high school students, middle school students, and elementary school students get the opportunity to learn about paleontology hands-on. It's run by the Sternberg Museum of Natural History, or it's affiliated with the Sternberg Museum of Natural History. The camps are affiliated with the Sternberg Museum of Natural History in Hays, Kansas, but they run programs all over the United States. And so if you sign up for one of these science programs, you will be given housing in a dorm either at the university or near the museum that particular camp is run through, and you will get the opportunity to learn something about the real practice of paleontology from a real paleontologist. One of our own, the one who's not here, in the jaws of the beast, Amelia, will be running a camp this summer. She will be guiding the students through the process of interpreting a new fossil. There's a new mosasaur specimen that was discovered by some of the field programs run by the Sternberg Science Camps last year, and Amelia will be leading the students as they go through the process of studying the anatomy, documenting the anatomy, taking measurements, scoring characters, writing a description, this sort of stuff. I actually have no idea what she's doing. She hasn't told us any of that, so if she doesn't do any of that, it's not my fault. But I know she's doing at least some of it. The point here is that these camps give you the opportunity to do what paleontologists do. And I think that is something that's really, really important.
Yes, I agree with that wholeheartedly, because I had the experience to do something like this early in my career as a paleontologist when I was in high school. Now, I did not participate in a Sternberg science camp. I don't know if they were operating when I was in high school or not.
I actually checked. They were not. They started when all of us were already in college, which is why I didn't do one. Right, yeah.
There you go. If they were around, I think I would have definitely tried to. I would encourage you to, if you're interested at all, go to the website, which should be linked in our description, and we'll probably have a pop-up at some point, and look at just all the variety of opportunities they have. There are a ton of paleontology ones. There's field experiences, research experiences, prep experiences. There's a geology camp. There's some other research camps. There's a scientific illustration camp. So tons of different things that are kind of tailored to your interests. And something that's so important about these kinds of experiences is that they let you get your hands on with the research process very early in your life. And getting those experiences under your belt makes you, fairly competitive when it comes time to pursuing graduate school jobs, things of that nature, if you choose to go down that route. But even before making the choice to go down that route, they give you the experience to know if this is something that actually interests you, that you actually enjoy. When I was a kid, I remember I always thought I wanted to be a paleontologist, but I didn't know I wanted to be a paleontologist until I had my summer experience in high school, which taught me field work, it taught me prep, it taught me research, and I fell in love with it.
Only part of our year is spent digging up dinosaur bones. And by part, I mean not a lot. Very little, actually. So what do we do with the rest of our time? Nothing important. No. We analyze our data, and there are lots of different ways to do that. You need to know how to do that if you want to be a paleontologist. And most of this is done in a lab, like the one you can see around me, which is not at Yale.
It's a green screen backdrop that I rendered in Blender for Alex.
Yes. Oh, yeah. So
no, go ahead, Alex.
We work a lot with computers, whether that's segmenting CT data, whether that's doing statistical analyses, making figures, things like this. It's stuff you're going to need to know to be a paleontologist.
Exactly. I think it's really important to emphasize that. I think when a lot of, certainly with my parents, the media image of what a paleontologist is somebody who goes out into the field and digs up dinosaurs. And so the opportunities that my parents were looking for when I was a young person interested in dinosaurs were mostly field opportunities. And that's really what I did in high school. I didn't really get a lot of opportunity to do research things. And that's partially because our image of what a paleontologist is so informed by things like Jurassic Park and seeing people in the field. But like Alex said, that's not really most of what our job is. And what I think is really special and unique about the Sternberg camps is that unlike other like summer intern or volunteer or science camp opportunities, there's a lot more than just field and prep. Field and prep stuff is always an important part of it. So it's not, I'm not trying to diminish that at all. But the fact that there are opportunities to learn how to like use CT data or to work with Amelia to learn the anatomy of a particular group of animals and how you would go about interpreting a new fossil find is something really special. And to my knowledge, something you can only get through the Sternberg camps, at least in the US.
We cannot overstate how important an experience like this can be. So go on their website, which we'll have linked on the screen somewhere. We'll fix it in post.
Yeah.
Somewhere.
It'll also be in the description.
Yes,
Probably.
as will the mailing list that you can use
Yes.
if you want to get future updates about the Sternberg camps. If maybe this isn't something you're going to do this summer, but might want to consider in the future, you can get the updates right to your email. So in case we're not doing ads for them next year, you'll still be able to find out about when they're running camps, when registration starts, and what camps will be available.
Yeah.
Indeed. But
Yes.
go on that website and check out what's available and sign up.
Check it out.
Yes.
And
Exactly.
when you do, let them know we sent you.
Yeah.
Right.
Hey.
Now, I bet you're waiting to find out if Dracorex is a valid species of pachycephalosaur or not, and to see Amelia again. And so I'm going to usher us back into the normal video. Thank you so much for watching and not fast forwarding through this section, because I think this information is important, and I hope that it makes meaningful change for at least one person. Which reminds me, Dalton said this in the last video, but I thought to say it now. If you do sign up for the Sternberg camps, just if there's a field to do it, you should let them know that you found out about them through the Skeleton Crew, if that's how you found out about the videos or about the camp.
Scott apparently
I just
has been on
said
mute
that.
the whole time.
Did you?
Yeah, Scott did say that.
I literally just said that.
My brain stopped existing for a period of time. All right. Well, I'm going to go apologize to Scott. You go back to Dracorex land. I'm sure we're having a lot of fun there talking about ontogeny. We always do.
I forget that only the bottom drawer opens for small things.
Yeah. I really like this design.
I do too.
It's so good.
It's really colorful in the right way.
It is.
It's
Go on, Dalton.
the thought I had when I was making, well, I wasn't making Hell Creek because we've had this map for a while now, but when I was putting these in earlier today or yesterday or whenever I did that, who knows, is that regardless of whether or not this is a real dinosaur, I'm really glad it's in the game because it gave Frontier a reason to include a design that isn't influenced by the movies at all.
Yeah, it's the only non-movie pachycephalosaur, which is
Well,
sad.
Well, Homalocephaly.
Oh,
also.
Homalocephaly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
which is also a great design, but this is just it's pretty great, pretty fantastic.
It's just kind of how the animal would have looked in life, at least as far as we know.
I'm curious to see like how exactly accurate the node arrangement is, but I mean, it certainly has the right vibe.
Yeah.
I think perhaps the node arrangement is not exactly correct, but I'm really not going to dig it for that. That's so specific.
I'm going to do a paleontology really quickly.
Okay, the node arrangement so for the large nodes, the 3 on the front is about right. There should probably be 2 more just anterior to the middle spike at the front of the snout. The ones in the middle, there should be 4 like that, with 2 kind of smaller ones behind the ones in the middle, which are right also.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's more the interpretation of all the spikes toward the back, I think, does not...
Yeah, they've kind of exaggerated them a little bit.
But I don't think that that's bad per se. The big jugal spikes or quadratic jugal spikes are pretty right. It's certainly got the right vibe. There might be there might be a spike too many or too few.
I think
these
two that point like directly backwards are a little weird.
Yes,
and I think they should be kind of lumped in with these, but also they might just be kind of running into geometry constraints, with the shape of this head and putting that all on without them colliding with each other.
Right.
Well,
yeah.
James, a spike too many or too few. That could have drastic implications to the validity of this animal.
It could. But before we talk about that, Amelia, what does this animal's name mean if it has a name?
It certainly does. It means the Dragon King of Hogwarts. Very cool. Very cool name.
Bum, 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 bum.
Whose idea was this? Because I was looking at the list of authors, and like none of these people seem like Harry Potter fans.
I think it was Bob Bakers.
Really?
In my head, it's Bob Bakers.
That's so funny.
I do think it was also, this is probably, I mean, this was 2006. I don't think anybody knew more about J.K. Rowling at the time.
No. I wasn't trying to imply that at all.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying, like, I think at this time it was just kind of supposed to be a cute nod to a children's franchise that was very popular.
Yeah. Was it because it was going to the Children's Museum?
I don't know anything about that process for sure, but I would not be surprised if they were like, it would be great if it had a name that would draw kids in.
Well, that's kind of in the etymology, which I did look at, was something to the effect of like for inspiring wonder and curiosity in kids, like in reference to the Harry Potter books or something like that. So I suppose that's okay. I'm trying to make a joke, or I'm trying to think of a joke about if there's ever another species of one of these, or like another similar thing, someone should name it the Mold King. The two kingdoms can exist.
Which they should. I like the name Dracorex a lot. Dracorex is really cool.
It's a good name.
Hogwartsy is unfortunate, both for cringe millennial Harry Potter and more importantly because J.K. Rowling is an irredeemable transphobe.
Yeah,
not good. But
bad.
They didn't know this in 2006.
Right. Yeah, it was named. 2006 feels recent to me still because I'm becoming old, but like that was 18 years ago or 19 years ago now. Right. So it was a while ago. And for the stated etymology and reason was that's not a bad. That's honestly one of the best justified pop culture reference names I've seen. I mean, like, not that you need a justification. You could just name it that because you like it. Like, it's fine. If I wanted to name a dinosaur Nosferatu and be like, because I like the movie Nosferatu, that's all the justification I need. There's no provision that you need to actually convince the reviewer that it's a good name.
Yeah.
In fact, I know of many cases where the reviewers are like, why are you naming it this?
Well, like, not that it was you shouldn't name it this, but we got a comment from a reviewer that they didn't think Yorgi was big enough to justify the name Jormungandr. And I was like, we can't name it anything else. It's from a town called Walhalla. But yeah.
Yeah.
I was trying to think of a Dune name because I was just trying to think of other things that we talk about a lot. And I was like, oh, it'd be cool to name something after Shai Hulud. And then I remembered that did happen. There's a Cambrian worm named Shai Huludida.
Oh,
I feel like there's at least two worms, like one very recent one, and then one that has had some kind of, I think it was a species epithet. I don't remember, and it might be extant, but I feel like there are multiple worms with sandworm references.
Well, viewers, keep an eye out for James. I'm spoiling James's work here by he's going to reveal a new Tyrannosaurus. Jesus, my brain short-circuited.
You see, I did mental warfare on you. You can't spoil the results of my research. I just sent out an aggressive, occluding brainwave all the way from New York to Michigan.
I was just going to say Tyrannosaurus.
Like that. I don't know what you just said.
I was going to say Tyrannosaurus.
Tyrannosaurus.
I was thinking whatever.
Yeah, funny. Whatever. Yeah, no. Anytime somebody tries to leak results of my research, they get a nosebleed. I don't know why.
You could just name it Genus Tony, species Soprano.
I would love that. This is Tony.
Yes.
You heard of T-Rex. Get ready for T Soprano. Tony.
Yeah.
We found another large
do it.
tyrannosaur in the Hell Creek. This is the domain of Tyrannosaurus Rex and Tony's Soprano.
You know, unfortunately, I think Tony is an available name.
You should do it.
Also,
It'd be
to the
really funny.
I
viewers,
really should.
this is not leaking any of James's stuff. I promise.
I'm trying to think if I have a species on deck that I could name that. So speaking of large, aggressive animals that like to have conflicts with their peers, pachycephalosaurs are very much like Tony Soprano in that they have giant bald domes.
Not this one,
Presumably
though.
bad tempers, but not this one. This one has a little bit of hair, like Tony in the season 3 flashback, where he flashes back to the diner he's in with Jackie Aprile, where Big Pussy comes in and has a conversation with them. Yes, there's a character whose name is Big
Big
Pussy.
pussy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, that's his name because he was a cat burglar.
The flat-headedness of Dracorex.
Yeah.
I just got to AJ's like crash out in season 6, and
yeah.
it is kind of giving me AJ Soprano vibes a little bit.
This is AJ Soprano a little. Maybe is this how many segues can we do poorly to talk about ontogeny? Are we getting there? Because I guess there's only really one thing to talk about with Dracorex, because Dracorex was named in 06, and then in 2009 it was officially proposed that it was a junior synonym of Pachycephalosaurus.
Yeah, it had a whole 3 years of validity.
So just for any viewer who's confused, because I learned this embarrassingly late in my career, junior synonym does not mean it is a synonym because it is a juvenile of this other animal. It means it was named later. And I think I was about halfway through grad school when I realized that. Because I often, I think so. Like, I think it was before you started, but I was like, wait a minute. I should probably know what the word junior synonym means here. And I was like, oh no, it's not what I thought.
Oh no, James! I can't believe I knew this before you.
That's fine. I mean, you have to learn things at some point.
We're all on our own journeys.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was always thinking about ontogeny, so I usually saw the phrase junior synonym used in the context of when it was a juvenile that was being lumped in. So it was a little bit selective in that regard, but just in case you were like me, that's not what it means. Junior synonym means it's the same as this other species or genus or taxon or whatever, but it was named later. So it's junior because the name is younger. The paper that proposed that these animals were synonyms was written by Jack Horner and Mark Goodwin. It was published in 2009 in PLOS One. And it was entitled Extreme Cranial Ontogeny in the Upper Cretaceous Dinosaur Pachycephalosaurus. And this paper proposed, this was one of the earlier... Actually, no, it's one of the later papers in the great ontogenetic synonymization. Dalton, is everything good?
Yes, sorry. I just wanted to make sure it was coming through the right microphone.
I think it definitely is.
It is.
So this was one of the first papers, this was one of the last papers in the wave of great ontogenetic synonymization that was occurring in kind of the mid 1999, I'd say, with the official suggestion that Nanotyrannus was a juvenile Tyrannosaurus Rex, and then which had been kind of mentioned previously in the literature, but the first paper actually stating that was CAR 1999. Then the Triceratops and Torosaurus stuff started happening in the mid-2000s, and then this was on the later end of that. And they proposed basically that all of the anatomical differences between Dracorex and Stygimoloch and Pachycephalosaurus are attributable to ontogeny. That these animals are developing domes throughout the course of their life, and that you are kind of moving and rearranging a little bit the cranial nodes, these spikes that occur on the external surface of the skull during the animal's lifespan. And they cite a few pieces of evidence for this, including seeming histological evidence that the bone of the dome in Stygimoloch is actually not fully mature. That it shows kind of high vascularization that's more typical of fast-growing juvenile bone, and the fact that these animals have very similar arrangements of these nodes. Also, the squamosal horns appear to show signs of immaturity and bone remodeling. So that's that paper. I'm summarizing it very quickly just because I'm just trying to give a little bit of background here for the whole debate on these animals. We talked in Stygimoloch pretty extensively about the fact that there's ongoing research that will eventually come down on the side of whether or not Stygimoloch is its own species or genus, or one or both, or if it is an immature discussion I've seen online. Dracorex seems to be more universally regarded as definitely a juvenile.
Yeah. It's the smallest of all of them, right?
It is.
Yeah, but not by that much.
No,
it's not. So when I saw the skull in person, because it's held at the holotype is in the Children's Museum of Indianapolis. I was there about a year ago now. 9 months ago. Working on the Gorgosaurus specimen that they have there and some of their Tyrannosaur material in general, because they've also got another Tyrannosaurus. And they did let me look briefly at the holotype skull. It's a lot bigger than I thought it was.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably about that big. It's sizable. I always kind of imagined it was something like that big. Just having not really seen it or thought that much about it. It's a fairly sizable animal. Certainly not adult Pachycephalosaurus size, to be clear.
But that seems like about the size of a little, maybe it's just a little smaller than Stygimoloch.
Yes, and Stygimoloch we also don't really have a complete skull for.
I was about to say, yeah.
But the models I've seen, the extrapolations are
yeah.
Yeah. In fact, at the MOR, the models they have on display, the Dracorex skull is actually a little bit larger than the Stygimoloch skull. As reconstructed. I don't know holotype. The Stygimoloch skull, I don't know which one that's based on. So that's kind of where we are. Because this question hasn't really been much further addressed. There hasn't been a lot of research specifically on Dracorex, and I'm not aware of anything imminently coming down the pipeline that specifically deals with it.
Because there's only the one, right? Basically.
Well, maybe. And Dalton, why don't you... this is a good place for you to jump in because you sent this paper.
There's only one Dracorex confidently known, which is the holotype, which is a complete skull that's absolutely beautiful. There are specimens that have been referred to. The referral of these specimens is a bit complicated, but there's a paper by Mark Goodwin and David Evans, the early expression of squamosal horns and parietal ornamentations confirmed by new end-stage juvenile Pachycephalosaurus fossils from the Upper Cretaceous Hell Creek Formation, Montana. This came out in 2016 in JVP, and they describe some small Pachycephalosaur remains. They're very fragmentary, but there's a little bit of parietal, so this bone that would have been right here in life in the top of the middle of the skull that in Pachycephalosaurus is making up a lot of the dome. In Dracorex it's flat. There is the jugal, which is this cheekbone, and then the squamosal, which is this bone at the back kind of corner of the skull, which houses this array of 4 little spikies. And they've got several of these. I don't know, I haven't read the whole thing yet, if these are all from one locality. They were collected I can read right now. I accidentally panned right to it. The specimens originate from the Hell Creek in Garfield County, Montana, collected in situ from a multitaxic bone bed rich in micro to medium-sized vertebrate remains. So unclear precisely if this is one individual or several individuals, but I agree completely that these are very similar to Dracorex, Pachycephalosaurine kind of animals. The taxonomic referral in this paper is, in my opinion, a little clouded just by uncertainty regarding is Dracorex Pachycephalosaurus. And so obviously these elements are very similar to an animal like Dracorex, which then if one is operating under the hypothesis that all of this material represents one taxon, these are juvenile, very small Pachycephalosaurs. And these elements come from a skull. There's a figure in the paper that illustrates kind of where these elements would have sat on a diagram that's based off of Dracorex. And this is from an animal that's smaller than Dracorex, maybe between 1/2 and 2/3 the size of the Dracorex holotype. And they have some similarities with Dracorex. So the squamosal has the 4 little spikes that come off of it. The jugal has it's eroded, but there's the base of a little horn and some of the bumpities that are on the jugal. And the parietal has a similar row of kind of big bulbous things. It's not exactly like the Dracorex holotype. And in my mind, it's a little questionable. I have a hard time, and I don't work on pachycephalosaurs, so I'm not tremendously qualified to speak on this. Some of the arrangement of the nodes on the skull seems to be taxonomically important. Some of the arrangement of the nodes on the skull seems to be intraspecifically and interspecifically variable. Delineating between those two, my gut tells me to be cautious. But regardless, this is certainly, there is at least another specimen or a couple chunks of a specimen of another Dracorex-like animal from the Hell Creek. But that, to my understanding, is basically kind of conservatively 2, counting the holotype. I don't know of any others.
Yeah. I mean, that's not incredibly out of the usual for the fact that this is a pachycephalosaur, which is like automatically a very rare group to find evidence of, and that it's a small animal in the Hell Creek Formation. Like, we just don't have a good representative of juveniles of most larger bodied animals anyway. So even if these are juvenile Pachycephalosaurus, the fact that they're very rare wouldn't really be surprising, just taphonomically.
Yeah. Not ecologically.
Right.
But taphonomically.
Yes.
Right. Whether or not they were there is not the same as are we finding a lot of them.
Or whether or not they were upland animals.
Maybe. Who knows?
Bupland.
Bupland. Well, so should we say anything concretely about the validity of this animal? Maybe not. Because none of us work on pachycephalosaurs. However, I will... I'm sorry?
I have a hot take.
What's your hot take?
You don't have to be a specialist to have an opinion on
This is true. This is actually true, and maybe
I'd never have an opinion on this show.
So listen, with my knowledge of pachycephalosaur anatomy definitely not being that of the specialists on this group, here's what I will say. There are a few things I find odd and potentially problematic with the hypothesis that this is a juvenile Pachycephalosaurus. One is the fact that there appear to be nodes present, not present in the adults of Pachycephalosaurus. Now I'm going to read right from the diagnosis here. The diagnosis of Dracorex from the Bacher et al. Paper specifically says that it... oh no, I'm sorry. It's only Dracorex would have this. It differs from... Oh, wait a minute. This is actually interesting. Hold on. Let me make sure I'm right about this. Yes. So it differs from Stygimoloch spinifer in possessing 4, not 3, spikes on the squamosal. So according to this, Pachycephalosaurus does have 4 squamosal spikes, but Stygimoloch does not. Which would imply, if this is one ontogenetic series, that Dracorex has to like grow up losing one of its spikes and then regaining it later. Now, that is admittedly not a problem if Stygimoloch and Pachycephalosaurus are different species, but Dracorex is the juvenile of Pachycephalosaurus, right? So at the very least, this would argue to me against the 3... they use the term ontogemorph sometimes, which I don't use that term for reasons that are kind of way too linguistically nerdy for even this show. So I'll just not talk about it. But growth stage is fine. There was already a word for that. It's been stated a lot that the dome develops during Pachycephalosaur ontogeny. One thing I think we talked about in Homalocephalae and a little bit in Stygimoloch is that we don't really have a lot of evidence that juvenile animals are actually developing the dome over time. Like the juvenile Prenocephalae, I believe, all have like domes developed down to the smallest growth stages.
James, did we tell our AMNH anecdote on the channel to catch viewers up on a story that we might have said in one of the previous ones? There was a time back when back in the Halcyon days when I was still working at the AMNH at the same time James was, and not much work was getting done because I kept talking to him all the time.
The phrase, the meme that's popular now, like this and yap, makes me think about those days quite a lot.
James, I have considered getting an old picture of my prep lab, and just sending it to you with this and yap. Yeah. And man, I've thought about that a lot.
Yeah.
Oh man, the piece of foam that was the make Scott go away stick that you would hit me with. Good times. Anyways, there was a loan that was returned from to the AMNH that included in it a cast of a homalocephale skull and a cast of a prenocephale skull. And I believe we said in the homalocephale episode, it's been hypothesized that homalocephale, being one of the flat-headed pachycephalosaurs, is a juvenile of prenocephale, being a dome-headed pachycephalosaur. Like, same thing with Dracorex and Pachycephalosaurus, as you were watching this video, probably because you were curious about, so I don't know why I explained that bit. James and I were looking at them because we were like, oh, wow, they're just right here. And I remember James was like, hey, Scott, do you notice anything about these two? When we put them next to each other, I was like, hey, James, I think the homalocephale is bigger. And you're like, you're right.
It is. And, ontogeny in its endless wisdom allows you to shrink to satisfy the hypotheses of scientists.
Well, maybe pachycephalosaurs are like, what is it, the paradoxical toad, where the tadpole's like twice as big as the frog?
Maybe. Right. Sure. As an amniote, we should expect that, of course. Yeah. What I will also
You should have seen how big I was when I was a baby. I was like 12 feet tall.
Yeah, he's just been shrinking. So looking at the paper again, there's one other interesting thing I noticed, which is that the skulls of Stygimoloch and Dracorex in the Horner paper appear to have two nodes that are absent in Pachycephalosaurus. One on the midline of the parietal, which is highlighted in red in the figure, and one kind of in the middle of the forehead, which is highlighted in orange. And it appears that there may be a pair of the orange one in Stygimoloch. It's not clear to me if that might be a different kind of feature on the skull. But there seems to only be one of them in Dracorex, and neither of these is present at all clearly in Pachycephalosaurus. I don't know if there's evidence that these things are being like kind of deformed to the point that they're obliterated, or maybe the suture with the surrounding bone is obliterated, but this is also some evidence, maybe, that the number of nodes is not fully consistent with these all being the same species. And in this case, this would be a similarity between Stygimoloch and Dracorex that is exclusive of Pachycephalosaurus. Now, we can say more about this specific situation here in a moment, but at this point, I'm going to shamelessly plug a recent pre-printed manuscript I put up a few months ago. The manuscript is about ontogenetically invariant characters and how we might predict which characters are not variable through ontogeny. And the way that I addressed this was a huge part of my PhD thesis, was I looked at a lot of modern crocodilians and tracked their ontogenetic sequence and looked for kinds of characters that were consistently discriminating between species but did not change over ontogeny. What I found is that there are some traits that do appear during growth that wind up distinguishing adults of a species but will be the same in the juveniles. But a lot of traits actually don't do that, and those traits are usually about the fundamental architecture of the cranial skull, or the cranial skeleton, rather. So what I kind of liken this to summarize a lot of like pretty detailed anatomy, and like the relationship between soft tissues during development and the skull bones, which is really complicated because the soft tissues are both existing previously, but also seem to be controlling the pattern of how the skull bones ossify. The ultimate architecture of your skull and your head is probably staying the same throughout your growth. And what I say is that you can think of ontogeny as being analogous to remodeling a room in a house. So you may significantly change the aesthetics of that space, but you're not doing a full renovation where you're changing the way that the plumbing and the wiring works. So if I remodel my kitchen and I like rip out my cabinets and put in new ones, and I change my stove, like I could switch out an appliance and do all of that, I'm not really altering what the space is. I'm changing the aesthetics and some degree of the function of the space, but the wiring and the plumbing and where the studs in the wall are and all of that, and the air ducts and all of that are staying the same. And that's what I would consider a wholesale renovation, where you completely rip everything out and rebuild it. And the basic principle that I come to in this preprint manuscript, which you can go online and read, it's on BioArchive. You can find it on my social media. It's open access. Is that if we're seeing traits that would argue for renovation, we might say these are probably not really attributable to ontogeny. And so if those differences are there, it's either polymorphism, where it's variation between members of a species. That's just because they've got different genes. And that can happen, and that does happen. So I don't want everybody to say, well, if we see any difference like this, these things have to be different species, because I've dissected now enough individuals of different species, including a lot of human donors for the anatomy education at Stony Brook that I like my job. And you see weird things. You see conditions where like a particular nerve foramen is doubled on one side. So these architectural differences that would require ontogenetic renovation could be polymorphism, or they could be differences between species. But what I say in this paper is very specifically, those things are probably not, or are almost certainly not, ontogeny. It's not that they changed as the animal grew. And so my perspective is that the differences between Dracorex and Pachycephalosaurus and Stygimoloch are what I would call architectural differences, and so they seem compelling to me. And so if they're all the same species, I don't think those are actually things that are changing ontogenetically. I think those are things that are just different between the individuals because they've got some variation in there. There's one thing I just want to say before I let somebody else talk, and that is that I just want to remind everybody that this is a preprint manuscript, and what that means is that it has not yet been peer-reviewed. Preprints are kind of a topic of a lot of discussion in the scientific community right now. There are advantages and disadvantages to them. I think the advantage is that you can get work out faster than it going through peer review. The disadvantage is that you could theoretically put up a manuscript and never send it for peer review, but it looks like a scientific paper. And so I'm just saying it is under review. And so this will be published in a journal in the future, and it will go through peer review, and I'm sure it will be modified according to reviewer comments. But I put it up as a preprint, because I kind of wanted some of my conclusions to be out there so that I could stop like feeling like I kind of had to keep them secret like multiple years after my PhD was done. But also because I like just sort of wanted to get feedback from the community in general, but I was fairly confident about the quality of the work because it was my PhD thesis. It faced a lot of scrutiny from my PhD committee. It was done over many years. And so this isn't like a half-baked idea paper that came out. This is like, I've distilled what was in my thesis into a manuscript that I put up as a preprint. And so, I'm certainly pretty confident in the conclusions. I'm not trying to say that it could all be wrong, but if you don't trust work that hasn't yet been peer-reviewed, you're welcome to not yet look at it. It will be peer-reviewed, and when that happens, I will be very loud about it. Don't you worry. You'll find out. And so that's my perspective on the differences here. Now, Dalton, I'm curious. Is there any is there any direct evidence from pachycephalosaur systems about whether these kinds of character changes are ontogenetically variable or not?
I don't think so. So it's just there is a paucity of data. Like I have tried to figure this out, and as far as I can tell, the best ontogenetic series of pachycephalosaurs we have is probably Prenocephalae.
Okay.
In which it was shown in 2018 by. Let me just double check this. I have the paper open as well. David Evans and many co-authors working on new specimens of Prenocephalae that basically after the Stygimoloch, Dracorex, Pachycephalosaur work came out, there was the idea floated that perhaps it was a general trend in Pachycephalosaurs that the babies were flat-headed and then the dome grew in. And then co-occurring with Prenocephalae is Homalocephalae. And the idea was perhaps it's a juvenile of Prenocephalae because it's got the flat head. And of course, we've already talked about how Homalocephalae is bigger than Prenocephalae, but size is not a tremendously great ontogenetic signal. It is one. I think, when you swing on one side of that pendulum to the other, it's easy to forget that, no, we can't rely on size alone. It's not a tremendously strong ontogenetic indicator. Nevertheless, animals do grow and get bigger to a point, right? So you got to be careful, but it's good to know. But there are more specimens of Prenocephalae now that show that no, it's not, that Homalocephalae is distinct, and that there are at least certain skull features, I think certain arrangements of nodes and various other bits and bobs. But I think it is kind of the arrangement of the surface texture of the bone stays consistent throughout Prenocephalae ontogeny. Now, Prenocephalae is not, tremendously closely related to Pachycephalosaurus. We haven't done Phylogenum, but we should probably do it at some point. But it's, it's not tremendously not closely related. It's closer than like Stegosaurus. Mm-hmm. So there's that. And I think the issue kind of being is that since the Horner and Goodwin paper came out, it was treated for a while. I don't want to say like gospel, but it was treated very strongly as we have a good ontogenetic sequence of Pachycephalosaurus, and now we're going to use that to investigate other Pachycephalosaur ontogeny. And I think maybe it's time to take a step back and kind of reevaluate that. And I think probably Prenocephalae would be the place to start in looking at how variable these are. To give my opinion as an unqualified, as a semi-qualified because I'm a vertebrate anatomist, but as a non-Pachycephalosaur specialist, looking at these, and I remember spending a lot of time looking at them when we did Stygimoloch, looking at photos of the specimens, and I've not seen them in person. And I haven't seen scan data. And I'm working with photos and comparing them and interpretive drawings. That being said, it's in the literature, so it is comparable. I noticed a suite of differences, and I don't remember. I should have written them down because I don't remember now what they all were, and I didn't have time today to reevaluate that. But I noticed many of the same things you did, James, where Dracorex shares some of these skull nodes with Stygimoloch, and it shares some of them with Pachycephalosaurus, apparently, as far as I can tell from the diagrams in the Horner paper. And it doesn't seem to me to be an obvious sequence of like, it's changing one to like between them. It's not as if it's a step ladder going from Dracorex to Stygimoloch. It's almost like immediately you kind of have a choose your own adventure of, do you want these nodes or do you want these nodes? Which is odd. But again, as you said, if these things are variable within the species, if this all is one species, we might just not be sampling enough of them to know. But I recall, and I wish I could pull it up, but I recall looking at some photos of the underside of the skulls of Pachycephalosaurus and Stygimoloch and Dracorex. And I feel like there were some differences that I thought were potentially important in the configuration of like the ventral aspect of the skull. My gut, as is wont to be, is I think it's my personal null hypothesis for these animals would be to treat them as distinct until we have really, really, really strong evidence showing that they're not. And I don't know that the evidence presented certainly gives a tantalizing idea, right? It puts the idea forward, hey, maybe these aren't three species, maybe it's one species. Maybe it's two species and Dracorex is just a baby Stygimoloch. Maybe Dracorex is just a baby Pachycephalosaurus. Maybe there's three species. I'm thankful for the paper for existing and kind of putting that idea out there. But I think it warrants more testing. And my view is that your null hypothesis should be that there's three different animals here. This is not even accounting for stratigraphy, which I'm not going to touch because I don't know it. I know of it, but I don't know the specifics.
I know of it. I don't know what's published, so I'm not going to touch that. But like my perspective on this has, at least like reviewing it briefly today, was I didn't understand how they came to the conclusion to begin with, other than the three things are all Pachycephalosaurs. Again, as a naive Lepidosaur person and, not having actually worked on these animals in an academic capacity. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm missing something. But we mentioned size earlier. Size isn't everything when it comes to ontogeny. Like the classic example being like, you are not the same height as all your friends your age. So you can't only use size. However, it is true that young animals are smaller than adult animals. However, in this case, like it gets like, this is even more confusing to me because like I just looked at the figure and it's like they're not that different in size. Like the Dracorex and the Stygimoloch are almost the same from what I can tell. They are all to scale, and then the pachycephalosaur is not that much bigger. And it's something I've been thinking about with my work on mosasaurs, which like technically you could theoretically find my opinion on fossil ontogeny as well, as it's not published, but it is online somewhere as an abstract. But something I've noticed is that there's a lot of specimens in vertebrate paleo that are called juveniles that are not babies. Like they're not what we think of is being said. Like this is not a baby animal. This is huge. Like I've seen a cast of it somewhere. And like we said earlier, like that's a large animal. It's not a hatchling.
It's like the size of a small cow, right? Like,
right.
Yeah.
And typically, when studies of modern animals are talking about ontogenetic changes, they're taught, and let's say reptiles specifically, they're talking about changes that happen from a hatchling to an adult. And that is a different range and scale of size difference and maturity difference than I think we're seeing here. The other problem I have with this, again, as a naive non-dinosaur person, is that there's only these like 3 or 4, and most of the other specimens, right, are just chunks of dome which have nothing on them. Possibly they have some nodes, but like we don't, like Dalton said, we don't know yet how those are informative because there's not enough specimens, and because since this paper has come out, everything that's coming out of the Hell Creek is just being called Pachycephalosaurus without investigating what it is really, because this paper came out in 2009. And then, and I was under the impression when you guys brought up that there was an ontogenetic series known for Prenocephaly, I thought that had been known prior. And so I thought, okay, maybe that's what they were basing this on. But to put it bluntly, my perspective looking at this paper is like they took 3 specimens that were different, lined them up, decided the endpoints, and then claimed that the changes between the individuals were ontogeny because the one on one end was a little bit smaller than the big one. And maybe that's not true, and maybe that's not very charitable, but I'm having a hard time with this one. Like a lot of, like, let's say the Torosaurus thing, right? There's a Triceratops and Torosaurus specimens from the Hell Creek. I can understand that you can get, there's a range of variation there, and it kind of features kind of line up in certain ways that make it look like small individuals have some characters and large ones have other ones. But like the other problem I ultimately have with this is just because something is small does not mean it's the same species as another thing in that ecosystem. It is possible for different animals of different species to be different sizes. And sometimes they overlap in size, sometimes they don't. And I don't know, I guess my point here is just of all of the ontogenetic synonymizations that came out of that period, this has always been the one that I'm just the least convinced by, because there's not a huge sample size. There's not a good record of these things at all, really, except for the Gobi ones, unless I'm mistaken. And I guess some of the Canadian ones.
I was going to bring up Stegosaurus because I can't currently access some of the papers, but there seems to be at least enough that's considered to probably be Stegosaurus that like we have another North American counterpoint. But the papers on that also do post-date this. So there is one piece of evidence here that we kind of haven't talked about yet, though, that I think is like relevant here, which is the histological evidence.
To that, my that's right. Thank you for reminding me, because I was thinking when you guys were talking about that earlier.
Yeah,
it falls into the same thing as just because an animal is small doesn't mean it's a juvenile of the same species. Like just because an animal isn't fully grown doesn't automatically mean, like it doesn't matter if it's juvenile. That is a different piece of information about the specimen than its taxonomic identity.
Well, yes, and this is a point I actually also talk about in my preprint that I was discussing before, because I say like these are not my general criticism of a lot of this kind of work is like what you said. We kind of conflate the questions of, is this a juvenile? If so, it's a juvenile of something we've already named.
Yes.
And like those are different questions. Like, the histological evidence, I don't really know I'm not really well versed in interpreting histological data, like beyond the broad strokes. That's not something I've ever specialized in. Like the papers I've been involved in that do that, those are co-authors interpreting those data sets. So like huge caveat here is that this is not an area I'm particularly well versed in. It does seem that the skulls they section do show evidence of immaturity in the sections that they took from the smaller things. That does not mean that those are juveniles of Pachycephalosaurus. It just means they're juveniles. Like it, to kind of put it bluntly, it could just be a juvenile Dracorex, right? Like it doesn't need to become an adult of the same thing later. And there's a lot of conflation that I think is based on assumptions that I've argued in the preprint are not valid about how ecosystems are composed, like that there's only ever one thing from particular clade and that they can't coexist, and so this is what would happen. And there's a rich literature on that, and if you're interested in a broader discussion of that, go read my paper. It's fine. Like it's fine. I discuss it at a lot of length there, but suffice it to say, there's not really a reason, like you said, that these being juveniles does need to make them juveniles of Pachycephalosaurus, but there is at least some good evidence that they're juveniles. Although not from Dracorex, because they weren't able to section that one. Right. No,
but it's like, that's my point is just that is a different piece of data that is okay. Like you cannot make a taxonomic decision based on how old a specimen is. So taxonomy, I know we say this a lot, but just in case, taxonomy is naming. That's the naming part of this science. You can't make a decision about like the identity of an animal based on how old it is. It doesn't work that way. It's the same way you can't make a taxonomic decision based on where the animal comes from. It has to be rooted in the anatomy of the animal because you're trying to figure out what kind of animal it is. Those other pieces of information give you context about that individual, but it doesn't tell you anything about what species it is because that's a different kind of data. So I am not saying that it's not important because when I have said this historically, I've been told, oh, you don't think that X is important, whether that's histo or strat data. That is not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that doesn't tell you what species it is. That's it. So in this case, like histo is telling us that this animal is immature, or not this one, but Stiggy. Okay, that's it. That's all it's telling. It's not all. There's more information you can get from histo. But in the context of this argument, histo does not tell you what species it is. It tells you how mature it is and bone growth rates and that kind of information.
Right. Which is really valuable, right?
Yeah.
And yes. And there's only one. I would quibble with one thing you said, Amelia, but it is not. Sure. It is not against what you actually said. To be clear, there are times where if you have something, you can then discount a possibility. But the inverse doesn't always work that way. So, like, if we were to section Stygimoloch and it were mature, that would be histo proving that that's not a juvenile Pachycephalosaurus. Because by proving that it is mature, we are then proving it is not an immature Pachycephalosaurus. Because, like, obviously, right? Yeah. Like, if we know that if the hypothesis is that it's a juvenile of a different species and we know it's not a juvenile, that means we've disproved that it's a juvenile of that other species. So, but the inverse isn't true, which if we show if it's not mature, then it is a juvenile Pachycephalosaurus, does not have to logically hold. So there are cases where we like have if A then B, but not necessarily if not A then not B.
Yeah, and even then, I'd argue like it's less likely. It's not impossible because different animals. It depends on how close they are in age, because different animals can stop maturing at different times. I don't know. Yeah, I'm just saying it's not like definitive. I'm not saying that's not true. It's like it's a piece of evidence against it. I wouldn't say. I would say
it definitely disproves the hypothesis as it's stated, though. I mean, unless you're invoking something else. Right. If the hypothesis is this is an immature version of this animal, if it's not immature, it's not an immature version of that animal.
But that's right. But the disconnect here is I'm saying that it doesn't say anything about. It still doesn't say anything about what kind of animal it is. You're just saying that it is not an immature version. You're saying you're disproving the maturity part, not necessarily the taxonomy part.
But in that case, they're intrinsically coupled. I would say you are doing that because, like, if it can only be that because you're invoking the immaturity. If you can disprove the immaturity, you are also then disproving the other thing. But I mean, I also agree, like, you have to make these decisions anatomically. Like,
Yeah.
If it's a modern animal, you could also do it with genetic evidence, obviously. But like we're talking about fossils. The anatomy is the only thing we can use to understand the evolutionary relationships, and that's a question that's not really disentangleable from what species and genus we call these things. Like there's a little bit of a disconnect in practice, but not really. Like they're fundamentally linked questions. But I like it again. If you have like, let me put it this way: if you have something that's obviously a Torosaurus juvenile, that disproves that Torosaurus is the fully adult form of Triceratops. And we've talked about this a little bit. There are definitely smaller individuals of Torosaurus that appear to be just that. I think we talked about this in the Toro video, right?
Presumably.
I think we might have also at least mentioned it.
I mean, they're on display. At least one of them.
Right.
Oh, sorry, Scott.
Yeah.
One of them is on display at the Perot Museum because I saw it's a cast. Well, it's one of the Yale ones. I don't know if the Yale one is on display, but like the one at the Perot is a cast of one of the ones at Yale, and it is definitely smaller than Triceratops that I've seen.
There's the one in Denver, right?
Yeah, our little one's not on display. The Denver one that they found in Thornton is no longer on display, but it was on display for a time, and I went and saw it, and I have seen Triceratops bigger than it. I've seen a lot of Triceratops bigger than it. It wasn't a small animal by any means, but it was like if I was going to a museum and I saw the one from Denver on display and it was a Triceratops, I'd be like, oh, that's kind of a smaller Triceratops. Did you not have enough?
Right.
But I've also seen like massive Triceratops. Like it's on display now at the Terrell, but that Cali specimen at the Terrell is
enormous.
a monster. It's so cool.
It's really cool.
Anyway.
Yeah. But no, so I mean, like there are like, again, this is hypothesis testing involves a lot of like formal logic, and I don't mean logic like in the way people use it where it's like I defeated you with facts and logic, but I mean literally how truth is, like what are the rules for how we determine whether something is a true statement or a defensive, like something has to be true or not. And like those are mathematical rules. Like I learned them in geometry class. Like, you know, if this is true and this other thing has to be true, if that's true, then proving A can prove C. Because if C has to be true because B is true, and you use A to prove B, then A also proves C. Like that is a logical framework, and it's stuff that's integral to hypothesis testing that we don't really discuss a lot. I think like what I try to talk about in the preprint is very much like, if we do have juveniles, how can we try to at least suss out the probability that the character differences are attributable to ontogeny? And I would say in that case, it's like, if we know these things are juveniles, can we assess the probability that these juveniles differ from the adults because of ontogenetic change? And my interpretation is kind of like everybody here, that I think the differences between Dracorex and both Stygimoloch and Pachycephalosaurus are probably what I would call architectural differences, and therefore seem unlikely to be changing because of ontogeny. And so the caveat that I have is more, can you go I don't think you can go from 4 spikes to 3 spikes during ontogeny on your squamosal. But I don't see any reason you couldn't have individuals with 4 spikes and individuals with 3 spikes living in the population.
Yeah.
And ranges are common. I think another thing that I think a lot of paleontologists often don't really think about, because we usually don't have enough specimens for this, are that a lot of modern species are diagnosed by ranges of character values. Like, you know, the number of teeth may be given as a range. Now, I argue in the preprint that like in a lot of animals, the number of teeth is probably not really changing during growth, but I'm not arguing that the number of teeth can't vary. Mm-hmm. Right. But what I do say is that variation is not growth related. And this may seem very like kind of pedantic, because I'm not saying we can then make a definitive statement, but like different forms of variation mean different things. And if we are saying these animals do this during ontogeny as a general rule of their development, that means something very different than this was just a trait that varied. And that is ultimately something that we kind of need to address as we think about these problems. So polymorphism becomes a possible explanation for these things, but it's not the only explanation. But what we can say is ontogeny is probably not the explanation. And by
And the
probably,
other-
I mean definitely. Sorry, Amelia.
No, I just want to say the other thing we have to keep in mind with fossils is like you talked about earlier about how in the anatomy labs you come across people that have variations, and those variations are, from what I remember taking that class, they're documented in in percentages. Like a percentage of people likely have this foramen in this spot. Is that like things like that? And the reason that we know that is because thousands or millions of people have been dissected over the course of human history, and these things have been written down and documented. We do not have thousands of Dracorex to document every possible variation. And not only that, even if we did have 1,000 of them, that's still a subset, like a teeny tiny subset of all the Dracorex or whatever that ever lived. And the fossils that we do have of these things are more likely than not going to capture the average morphology.
I wouldn't
and
actually.
that's not-
I wouldn't say that. Because
Okay.
there's only a few. There's only like 2, and so we don't have any way of even assessing. Like you could get
Well, sure.
only an extreme, and
You could, but that's the
Well,
other end of the problem.
well,
is we
well,
don't know.
but there's also a good reason to think you might, because we know the taphonomy in the Hell Creek biases larger size, and so you may be
Right.
selecting only for extremely large individuals, which like the size of a small cow is kind of what we say the size of the Dracorex is. And this is a question of like intra versus interspecific variation, but it's possible that like if we accept that we're getting mostly the largest species, we would probably also, by that logic, be getting, when we get anything, we're probably getting the largest individuals of that species more frequently. And not like literally the largest, but like on the large size end. Like most T-Rexes are about the same size. Like we don't get a lot of juveniles, regardless of your opinion about what's a juvenile Rex or not. No matter what you're calling those things, almost all of the specimens are mature and are enormous.
Yeah,
So you may
wanted
be
to clarify,
sorry. Yeah.
I did not literally mean you're getting averages in terms of like size and stuff, because I am well aware of size biases.
Yeah, no, of course.
Soon.
But I'm saying that
like,
individuals that are abnormally large are also maybe going to not be typically more typical in morphology if they've got something pathological.
But it's a big maybe. Like the key here is we don't know. We don't know what the biases are for what we're getting. My point is just like there is some kind of bias, whether we're just getting the average or we're getting the large ones or we're getting the weird ones. We have no way of knowing, because in this case we have one. We have one. We might have more, but those are isolated bones that may or may not be. We have one. One, parentheses, one.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm just saying there's not really, with only one, we don't really have a justification to even say it's probably a pretty typical representative of the species.
Right.
And I would argue, based on the taphonomic biases, we probably would actually be justified in saying it's probably not a typical one. Maybe, or it's more likely not typical than it is. That's definitely up for some debate, but regardless,
Sure.
like
Okay.
with only, right. I mean, this is my like big fear that I have, because like you may have seen the paper that came out. I'm sorry, with the lag is killing us right now, but I just have to make this one last point. Amelia, I don't know if you remember this paper. I think it came out maybe right when you started the Gilder School. Did you see the paper that concluded that like most mammals in the fossil record are male?
Yes. Oh, I remember that one.
Like an overwhelming abundance of the mammalian fossils we can sex are males. And it and I remember it was something absurd, like it was close to 80% are males.
Oh, it was bonkers. It wasn't just like I remember my dad sent me that article, and I remember just kind of looking at that and going just like, oh yeah, maybe it's just that like a lot of people end up just like grabbing the ones that are like big and flashy and have display structures like deer and stuff like. And I opened it up. I was like, oh wow, it's wild.
Now in mammals. Right, and this is why I kind of think this. In mammals, what sex is usually larger? Almost invariably, if there's a sexually dimorphic body size thing, it's usually the males that are larger than the females. And we know that in almost every context, being larger means you're more likely to be fossilized. And so what that would imply is that you've got a filter operating on like every level that's mostly selecting for the really big individuals, which is giving you this absurdly skewed sex ratio where you're mostly getting males in the mammalian fossil record. And like the mammal fossil record is rich. There's a lot of material. So this is not a condition where we're saying, oh, we only have 3 and 2 of them were males, because that's like flip a coin 3 times. That you can only get if it's a sex binary, you can only get 2 options. If you have 3, 2 of them are going to be one thing and one's going to be the other. We're talking about really large sample sizes for a wide range of things. I think the study even included rodents, but I don't remember that explicitly. So like, it's pervasive. And so from that, we might say, well, if dinosaurs were like that, the same principle about size is probably applying. I don't know if that's really the mechanism that it is. I think they propose a few things, but I don't think they were able to definitively say exactly what the bias was. I'll read the paper again when I edit this video, and also if I'm wrong, I'll have a screen here about what the real explanation is, and I'll record a video of me apologizing to the viewers for getting something wrong. But it, like, assuming that that's operating, most of what we see in the dinosaur fossil record may be male morphology and not female morphology, which could even be responsible for the fact that we don't see sexual dimorphism, because we may get 2 specimens, both of them are male, they look identical, and so we say there's no sexual dimorphism. It's because we actually have 2 males and we don't have a female. But I would also then argue that that probably means we are selecting for large size, and then we might also be expecting, if we're only getting larger individuals, large humans tend to be a little morphologically weird, like extremely large humans. I'm not even talking about gigantism, but it's like things get a little weird and like remodeled oddly when you get to that kind of size. Like it puts strain on your joints and everything. And so like that's why I would say I don't think we could say that we'd expect it to be an average individual.
I didn't mean average with that. I was thinking like bonus foramina and things that are developmental and not controlled by size.
Fair point, although we don't know. I mean, there's probably correlations with that, but yeah, right. I do understand what you're saying, right?
I'm not ruling out size bias in the fossil record, but I'm thinking about like the literally almost 100 Tylosaurus that I'm pretty sure are probably the same species, and they're like nearly identical. Like I'm thinking about like my own system. It's like there is like little variation here and there, but the difference is with Tylosaurus, I have hundreds of them, and not.
Right. And that means you can test it.
Right.
You have some indication that at the very least what you're seeing is common. And we can't do that with Dracorex. So we have no idea about the ranges for a lot of this. And it is difficult, and this is what makes paleontology hard.
But also, I want to, because of a conversation I had in a Discord earlier today, I want to emphasize like that this does not mean we know nothing and that we have nothing. We have more than, we're lucky to have what we do have. And from that, we can use the modern animals to understand that and make informed decisions and hypotheses using what we have. We don't know nothing, but we do need to be, I think, as a field, a little more accepting of what we don't know and more upfront and honest about the interpretations that we can make from the data that we have, especially in situations where the data that we have is one specimen.
Exactly. And that is like a really important point. It is just like sometimes we don't know, and that's okay. And I think that you do need to be very cautious about coming to preliminary conclusions, because everything in the scientific literature affects everything that comes afterward. And so I think it was both Amelia and Dalton who I think raised this point, but it may have only been Amelia. Like this ontogenetic series being published definitely affects the way later pachycephalosaur material that's collected from anywhere is interpreted.
Yes. I want to raise a brief point.
Sure, go ahead, Dalton.
That dovetails off of that, which is just because you brought up Stegosaurus, which I forgot existed. And so I want to talk a little bit about Stegosaurus, which is just to say that in 2011, Ryan Schott and colleagues published a proposed ontogenetic sequence of Stegosaurus. There's a figure of it I will link that I think is very good evidence of a ontogenetic series of flat to dome and like a development of the dome over life, which, to be clear, even though I'm not confident that we've got one ontogenetic series of Hell Creek pachycephalosaurs, I don't disagree with the notion that the dome might be a feature that grows in. But that being the case, I still think it remains to be seen, is Dracorex a juvenile? Potentially, exactly how old it is, how developed it is, we don't know. would it, if it is a juvenile, would it have grown up to be something that had a dome? Maybe. Would it have stayed relatively flat-headed? I think that's a possibility. I think the fact that there are better, like decently well-constrained ontogenetic sequences that show the development of a dome is cool in Stegosaurus. Meanwhile, if you look at the Prenocephalae ontogenetic sequence, it looks like they have a dome from the smallest specimens to the biggest. And I mean, maybe we're just not capturing, like, maybe we're capturing smaller adults as instead of younger adults. It's possible. So maybe Prenocephalae did have a flatter domed stage and we just haven't captured it. Or maybe this is just pretty variable within the group. It's unclear. What it does show, what the Stegosaurus sequence shows nicely, is that at least in Stegosaurus, the parietal foramina close as the dome develops, which is also what you would expect if Dracorex grows into Pachycephalosaurus. That's cool.
That is cool.
It's cool. And, you know, could the juvenile of Pachycephalosaurus look like Dracorex or even be Dracorex? It could be. But I think I'll reiterate just that my stance is that the conservative, from my point of view, the kind of conservative null that you should approach the Hell Creek Pachycephalosaurs with is that there are 3. And perhaps there aren't.
I mean, the problem is, like, there is also just so little that we have for Pachycephalosaurs in general.
Yeah.
But I think I think perhaps we're circling the same point several times, so maybe we should rank it. Scott, is there anything else you... Oh, we didn't do Phylogeny because Alex is talking with Count Orlok about this new Transylvanian fossil. I've heard that it's a flying creature with some sort of, like, dentition that seems adapted for like extracting fluid. I'm wondering if it might be like a nectar-feeding pterosaur or something. Phylogeny, to be Alex for a moment, this is a Pachycephalosaur. That's what it is. Regardless of what it is, it does appear to be closely related to both Stygimoloch and Pachycephalosaurus. Obviously, if it's a juvenile of one of those, or if 2 of those are juveniles of one of those, it makes sense that they're all closely related because they're all the same goddamn thing. But it's also possible for them to not be the same thing, but be close relatives with each other. They seem to be, I believe they're usually called a tribe Pachycephalosaurini, yes, which is at the kind of the most derived and latest diverging position within Pachycephalosauria, which is this clade within the larger clade Marginocephalia that also includes ceratopsians. And so as currently understood, the arrangement of these animals phylogenetically is that Pachycephalosaurs are the closest relatives of ceratopsians. We don't really have an early fossil record of Pachycephalosaurs. They just kind of pop up. But based on that relationship, they would have had to diverge in the Jurassic. What, Scott?
We might have a very good fossil record of early Pachycephalosaurs, but everyone just stepped over them because they thought they were rocks.
It's possible. Right. I mean, it is also important to note the fossil record of this group are mostly domes, which is not great and causes a lot of problems. I mean, when you have a good fossil record, you still have a lot of the issues we've discussed, but at least you have more data. Like, it is hard when what you're mostly getting is the part that's kind of a giant ball. That's most of what we have. It's hard. And, you know, we always need to be working on the fossil record and everything. I think there are just cases where I'd say, like, we probably don't yet know enough about Dracorex to know 100% what it is. I would, for the record, I would just love a long bone that we could section to actually know how old it is and how mature it is, because we're not cutting the skull in half. That's simply not going to happen. And skull bones don't really record a record that is comparable to that. You generally need a long bone to really get an accurate growth record. Like the dermal bones of the skull are just not going to do the same thing. But anyway, they're Pachycephalosaurians. They're late diverging Pachycephalosaurs. That's kind of what we got. Pachycephalosaurs are an interesting group, though. Pay attention to the literature.
I wanted to say that in a point that we've managed to... I'm actually kind of surprised that we managed to not say anything about this at all during the conversation about ontogeny, is that some points some very quick little points against the idea that it was just called a baby because it's small is there's 2 other pachycephalosaurs in the Hell Creek that are smaller than this that are not called baby Pachycephalosaurus. There is Spherotholus and Platytholus, and Platytholus was only named recently.
I forgot that they were Hell Creek.
Yeah, everyone only thinks that there's just Pachycephalosaurus, but there's not. There are 2 others. And it does seem like Platytholus is closer related to Stegosaurus, possibly. Sorry, Platytholus seems to be closer related to Praenocephalae, and Spherotholus is just a dome.
Hell yeah.
But actually, okay,
What
never
if
mind.
it's a baby Pachycephalosaurus?
What?
It's an orb.
But also, sorry, I have to be more specific. It's only one of the species because there's 5 species of Spherotholus. And which one of these is Hell Creek? Let me see.
It's Spherotholus buckholtzi.
It's Buckleteye? Okay.
I
All
think.
right.
I hope it is.
It is.
Yeah, it is. It is.
Okay.
Oh, there's also there's 2. Triregnum.
Oh yeah, Triregnum.
Triregnum. So
I will not be trying Regnum.
So there's 3 more Pachycephalosaurs known from the Hell Creek that are smaller. So, and yeah, cards on the table. I would not be surprised if you're gonna say any of these are a juvenile Pachycephalosaurus. I think you would be more based to say it would be one of these, but I don't think it's necessarily true. Well, we need more evidence than just a ball.
A sphere of Thole.
A sphere of Thole.
It
Sounds like an
would be
item that you would pick up in Skyrim and it would curse you.
It would be so cool.
And touches the sphere.
Yeah, it would be so cool if this if this whole phylogenetic group just left a fossil record.
Mm-hmm.
It'd be so cool.
Yes. And so the last thing that I wanted to say that definitely should have started this episode given the linear nature of time in the study of this animal, is that I was actually reached out to by a viewer of the channel, Brian Fernando, who is a big fan of ours. Thank you for watching. We really appreciate it. And if you also appreciate us, you should, again, hit that like and subscribe buttons. But so Brian mentions that he was mentored by one of the brothers that actually discovered the original gorgeous skull of Dracorex. That was originally discovered by Dr. Pat Salisbury and his brother Steve Salisbury. And yeah, asked if we could mention that in the episode, which, of course.
Yes. And they also, according to the Bacher paper, made the decision to donate it to the Children's Museum of Indianapolis, which I just want to say is a wonderful institution.
That's awesome.
The fossil collection is not like huge just because they haven't been collecting for that long, but they've had amazing success in the field in like the last decade and a half, and they've found some amazing stuff. They just mounted some new sauropods they discovered, which are like stunning specimens. They've got a lot of really cool things. Their initial specimens, I think were purchased for display there, but are all completely accessible to research now, because they're property of the museum. And they've been doing they've just been doing amazing field work in the Morrison Formation. They're finding really cool stuff. It's a great place. I really like working in the collection there. I'm looking forward to going back. There's going to be some exciting research coming out of there, so stay tuned for that. But as of
And
now,
the curator is Joe Fredrickson, another not Carthage student, but Carthage adjacent. He was mentored by Carr, but he went to UW Milwaukee. But also wonderful person.
yeah, he's a great guy. I like him a lot. Yeah, and I mean Laura Rooney, who also is in that department there, is also fantastic. Really wonderful group. I just had a wonderful time as a visitor. I was only there for 3 days, and talking about how unusually just amazing it is to work there. You're usually not allowed to go to collections on a weekend. But they made that happen for me because I wanted to be in Indianapolis while there was an eclipse going on. So, they were like, yeah, we'll work with you. It's all fine.
And that was also, sorry, I keep it because that was a lot. There was a lot going on that weekend because also we went to Raw Thrills that weekend. That was the other reason we were all convergent because that was also Midwest Gaming Classic.
Right.
So
yes.
we went to Raw Thrills right before, and then we did the Gaming Classic, but you didn't go because you were in Indianapolis.
Yes.
And then the eclipse happened. Yes.
Yes. It was fantastic. I like it there a lot. It's a great museum. But now should we rank this?
We should indeed.
Let's rank it.
All right.
As we go to the ranking in the talkie-walkies, I think I found the mammal paper, the widespread male sex bias.
Me too. Oh yeah, that was the other thing I was going to say was I read through that and yeah. Go on, Dalton.
No, I was just going to say they propose a potential size thing going on, but they don't come down very strongly on that. They seem to propose a different mechanism, which is that female mammals tend to kind of be, especially in herds like bison, because a lot of this data is driven by bison, that they've got big female herds. And so the herds are all in one spot, and then males that kind of antagonize each other have separate territories. So the males are more distributed across the landscape, homogenously, and the females are pretty heterogeneous. So the males just might have more opportunity to go into areas where they would get preserved.
That's also interesting.
That's what I remember about the hot springs, the mammoth site. I think every mammoth in the hot spring pit is male, and they proposed something like that it happened when the males were they had just left the herd or whatever, and they were out exploring on their own, and they fell into the mud pit.
I've also, if memory serves, when I went there ages ago when I was a kid, that something was mentioned that, especially with how intelligent proboscideans are, that there's a chance that an animal that falls in there could get help from another individual, but if it's a lone male, then it might not.
Yeah.
But it's also worth mentioning, James, you were very close with your off-the-cuff reference to the percentage, which is it was 75% of bison, and very close in mammoths, which was 72%. Because they looked at bison, brown bear, and mammoths, and then also Myotragus, the horrifying cursed demon dwarf, cold-blooded, forward-facing eyed goat thing. And apparently all of the bones that they tested were male.
Oh, God.
They only tested 9 bones, but it was still, everything was male.
That's insane.
And they also, in this paper, do reference looking at extant collections, too.
Yeah.
And the extant collections are way closer, but still above a 1-to-1 ratio of males to females.
That doesn't surprise me too much.
Same.
Yeah. But yeah, the fossil record, it's not so good. What is so good might be this. Amelia, what do you think of it?
Sure. So I don't hate it. It's got kind of that dumb, look that deer do to it, where it's just there's lights are on, but nobody's home.
Right.
I'm not going to say what I just thought. I don't hate it. I just wish, I think it's just in contrast to how pretty the fossil is. it somehow is not as pretty as its fossil. Which maybe this is accurate, maybe it's not. I just kind of don't jive with it. Yeah, I'm gonna give it an A. Like, it's not bad. And this is no knock on like the design or the recreation of the animal in the game. I think it's just somehow it doesn't quite live up to how pretty the fossil is, and how I think it probably would have been more interesting to look at with all the keratin and probably some weird colors. And like, I think about the prehistoric planet one and like just all the subtle little patterns and things. Not that that was a Dracorex, but like all the subtle little patterns and things they added to it. I feel like there could be a little more to it. Yeah. Okay. That's all I'll say before I short out again.
So I really like it. I think it's great. I'm going to give it an S. I think it's a very pretty and scientifically informed version of a pachycephalosaur. I don't think that even Homalocephali is H tier, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't feel like it could be in like a prehistoric kingdom type game that's holding itself to a higher standard of like reconstruction. This just looks fantastic. I really like this model. Yeah, it's a fun little guy. Makes us talk about ontogeny. He made me able to plug a piece of work that I'm very proud of and be obnoxious about it on camera for an hour. So all of that makes this an S tier for me. I love him. And he'll always be valid to me.
I'm also giving this an S tier. I think it's gorgeous. I also, to Amelia's point of that, wish that there was more fun and interesting colors. I think that I have three things to say about that. Number one, I think that you could interpret that as the devs were including this with a little bit of maybe a bit of a subtle nod that it might not be a fully mature one, and therefore it has kind of more just general cryptic coloration in a lot of its patterning and with these spots and stuff like that, and it doesn't have very obvious bright coloring on like the spikes or anything like that. Number two, and this kind of ties into point 3, which is I actually think you're very wrong in this, and it has some very pretty, nice colors. And Dalton has just decided to show this as it featuring in the original 1922 Nosferatu, where it's just black and white.
I like it.
It might be nice.
Is it also going to carry its coffin around town, like,
and look both ways when it crosses the street?
Yeah,
see,
spoilers for New Nosferatu. That scene being absent ruined my viewing experience.
It actually, on some of the other patterns, it does have some kind of like blue war paint or like some like brighter colors on the face. I like it. I think it's lovely. I'm giving it an S tier.
The colors are better. It's just, I think it's something. It's not clicking. Something isn't clicking. I don't know what, but.
That's fair. I've been given a warning that we have 3 episodes. No, I've been given a premonition from Alex. Our psychic connection flared up when he was used as a blood feast for a monster out of peasantry. And he says that it's S tier. I think it's great. And I'm going to echo that. I also think it's great. It's S tier. I'm going to say a controversial thing that I didn't know if I was going to say it, and now I am going to say it. I think this is my favorite pachycephalosaur in the game. And now, Homalocephali is H tier. Homalocephali is cuter. Homalocephali might be my favorite design. I think I like the design of Homalocephali more. But this is my favorite one in the game, because it's a beautiful design that you can actually see when you play the game. You don't have to zoom into as much, and it fits in really nicely with the Hell Creek. It's nice. You can put it in with Dracorex, or you can put Dracorex in with Dracorex. Did you know? You can
they actually prefer that.
They do prefer that. That's right. If you're playing, that's the one detraction, which is if you're playing with the normal game rules, you can't really put all 3 of them together because they hate each other. But they look really nice with the Pachycephalosaurus and with the Stygimolochs. And if you're inclined to think it's a growth series, then you can put that in there, and you can change the ratios of how many are in your exhibit to reflect what you think the adult to juvenile ratio of a Pachycephalosaur population would be, which you can pull those numbers out from wherever you like. But wherever it's to your heart's content, you can do it. I think it's really great that this is in the game, and I'm really glad they added it, and that they weren't dissuaded by the possibility that it might be a juvenile Pachycephalosaurus and decided to include it anyways, because we got a really nice design.
Alrighty. Well, that puts that puts Dracorex very firmly up in S tier.
Look at
Yippee!
that.
Wonderful.
We love it.
Look at that. All right.
It's
time to
spin
that
wheel.
I hope we get.
Oh
never mind.
no.
What were you hoping for, Dalton? Was it this?
No, it was actually anything but this.
Well, here we are. We had to talk about it eventually. All right. Well, everybody, next week or next time on the Skeleton Crew, we will be talking about the baryonyx design that everybody has been with sparks in their eye. What metaphor am I trying to make? I'm very tired. People want us to do this one because they think we'll be mean about it, and that might be true. But who are some of these people? Many of them are people who are patrons of the Skeleton Crew. And I want to take this opportunity to thank them for their support of our channel. At the time of recording, our patrons in Gorgosaurus tier and higher include insert nickname Benjamin Seepser, Christopher Bellis Jones, Aaron Anderson, Anamolos, Blacklight Virus, Black Spectral Pig, Brett Booth, Camphibia, Chaotic Kaiju, Dinodom, Kevin Preem, King Zashu, Life Finds a Way, Resty HBK, Ryan Wants to Die, Severed Moosehead Tavern, The Wigster, Touch Connors, Wanderer, and Wheat. Thank you all for your support. That has grown. Thank you all for your support of the Skeleton Crew, and thank you all for your creative nicknames like Severed Moosehead Tavern, which brings me great mirth when I hit to read it on screen. Anyway, thank you all for your support of the Skeleton Crew. The support from our patrons is so key in us continuing to do what we do, and we appreciate each and every one of you. So thank you all very much. We will see you next time when we talk about baryonyx. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.